Rahim. Yes, Assalamu alaikum. I'll probably do a quick brief overview. I'm aware some of you, mashallah, have already done some reading in the past as well as being familiar with the terminology. So inshallah, we'll pick up the names of everything as soon as we go, but we'll just do a quick brief introduction of how things are covered, how they're pronounced, the tools that we have for pronunciation, and then we'll move on to the pronunciation of the letters. And then once we get at least one or two letters, it'll be just mainly revision today. We'll move on, inshallah, to Muhammad, just getting things going with regards to the mechanics of each letter. So just quickly, inshallah. So here, from right to left, we got the fatha, which is at the top. Fatha means it's an open, high-pitched vowel sound. Next to it is a dhamma, which makes something sound a bit heavier. And next to it is the kasra, which is called the broken sound. So kasra is always different to fatha. So using Hamza as an example, you'll probably with a fatha. Dhamma is closed, sounds like u, and kasra is e. The next three images are the different versions of sukoons. So sukoon is to make something silent. You do not pronounce the sound of the letter. And the last one is the shadda. Shadda is the emphasized vowel, or it's basically what we refer to as the double strength on the letter to give it emphasis. You can't start on a shadda. You need actually something before that in order to move it. We'll cover these with examples later on. So we'll go to the next slide, inshallah. Oh, yes. So common mistakes. So I wrote this up as a brief guide. This is based on my limited experience of teaching Ahkam of Quran and Tajweed. Use this as your own personal guide with regards to teaching you to see what level you are in terms of your pronunciation. Quite often people ask me what level I'm at. I can give them maybe a straightforward answer, but it's easier if you can gauge your own pronunciation. But this is what I look for just in terms of Makharij, because it's probably people think of it as an easy subject, but it's probably the most complex as well. So quickly, first thing you need to look out for are the letters, if you're pronouncing them correctly. Then once you get all sifat correct, you'll move on to heavy versus light. Are you making the heavy ones heavy as you ought to, or are you making them light? You're not having any sort of, you could say, cross-contamination. The next level of sifat is basically you could say studied in detail, even at the level of ijaza, and it tells you the exact inherent characteristics of each letter, as well as the mechanics of pronouncing it from the mouth, where your tongue, where everything is supposed to be. So that's pretty much more on the intermediate advanced stuff. And then the last one I refer to as my own definition, or what other sheikhs use as takhlis. Basically, the concept of takhlis in Arabic translates to English to liberate one letter from another. And quite often, what happens, and this is a common mistake between the most advanced reciters right down to beginners, and that is when you get a heavy letter next to a light letter, what ends up usually happening is they cross-contaminate each other to the point that people can't hear what you're saying. The person that does this mistake already knows how to pronounce a Hamza, a alif, a ba, and a ta. That's not the problem. But what happens when you put really complex letters next to each other in a really tight space, it can come out incorrectly. This is just simple voice mechanics. Just like when you talk to somebody and you get a bad reception over the phone with regards to WhatsApp or talking overseas, you can do the same thing if the physical mechanics of your mouth is not coming out correctly. So we'll just go to the next one, inshallah. Yes, so this is just an illustration of the cross-section of what your mouth and throat should look like when you do a fatha, a dhamma, and a kasra. The fatha obviously is more open. The dhamma, the trick to getting a correct dhamma is raising the back of your tongue. We'll discuss this in detail later on. A kasra, the most common thing is I keep hearing sometimes is the kasra, the broken sound isn't coming out pretty clean. For example, rather than saying bih, people say bih. It's supposed to be bih, but people say bih, simply because they're used to not lifting the middle of their tongue to the roof of their mouth, because it's a physically. Go ahead, sir. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, perfect. So just to cover real briefly, rather than saying bih, which is the correct way of pronouncing, they'll probably say something like bih. And this is simply because they're not lifting the middle of their tongue to the roof of their mouth, because it could be because of cultural factors, the languages that you have, a dialect that you picked up. So it's simple things like this that actually add up and mashallah give you correct pronunciation. So that's just a rough overview. We'll go to the next one. So tanween. Tanween, basically, it looks exactly as the same as a fatha, dhamma, kasra, but you're getting double of each. So to give you a letter as an example, let's use alif as an example. Rather than say a, u, i, if you see a double fatha, double dhamma, or double kasra, it'll sound like an, un, in. So that's basically it. Quick question. Now you could see I gave you the different ways they look like in the Quran. Does anybody know why they look different? Because I said there's 3 ways of pronouncing an, un, in. But here I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, plus fatha, probably even 5, 6 variations. Any idea why?
I think what he's asking that is there any difference between this one and that one? Why? Because both are double dhamma, but why are they different? Anyone who knows that? Based on Tajweed rules. No. Brother Ibrahim, you can guide them maybe.
Okay, that's all right. We'll go to the next slide anyway. So this is the tricky part. You can see on the first one, khayra yara. Here, what we've done exactly, we call it the sliding tanween. You don't need to know this, but this is basically if you're writing the Mus'haf from scratch. The Quran, mashallah, is written in such a way that we have in our hand today that even the harakat give you a hint on what's going to happen next. So you don't, in Arabic speech, you'll say khayran yara. But in Arabic, in Tajweed, sorry, you say khayran yara. Khayran yara. You probably say shay'in wakil. So you can see it's 2 harakat on top of each other, but they're sliding. So this is a hint when you start doing intermediate to advanced level Tajweed. If you're looking for the Mus'haf for hints, the harakat themselves, they're exactly the same, but they kind of change slightly to make it easier to pronounce. So go to the next slide, inshallah. Alrighty, so this is mad. Mad probably comes in 2 forms. You've got the natural mad, like say, let's just say, for example, what's a good word? Ma. Ma is water. So ma elongated by 2 harakat. So that's known as the Hamza Khinjariya or the Maqsura, the one that looks like a sharp dagger. So that's the short one. It's 2 harakat long. So it's just a natural elongation. Example of this you see is Maliki Yawmiddin. The other one, the one on the right of it, is actually the long one. It could be 2, could be 4, could be 6. But an example of this you'll find, for example, Ulaik. That one has to be pronounced longer than the natural mad. The origins of it was actually the word on the left. You see how there's a big one called mad on the bottom left-hand corner? So it used to be called mad, and it used to be written on top of each alif. And then over time, it became easier and shorter to cut out the meme and make it look like the diagram on the right, on the far right with the long eyebrow looking thing. So that's the origins of it in the old Muslims. So just a hint to everybody, these are the easiest brownie points you can ever see. If you ever see it in the Mus'haf, say, Ulaik, make it 4 long. You know, it's not that hard. It's like, these are the easiest marks you can get for any Tajweed recitation. So I'll go to the next slide. Now, this is a really interesting, I'm not saying it's controversial, but this is a group exercise I'd like to get an answer on. You can see Surah Al-Fatiha, ayah number 4, Maliki Yawmiddin. When you look at it, when it's written in Arabic, and it's pronounced as if exactly the same. It's just written differently. Maliki and Maliki. But what I'm saying is that the Hamza Khinjariya gives basically the exact same lengthening. Now, the question that comes out is, they're both exactly the same, and they pronounce exactly the same. Why do we write it like the bottom line instead of the top word? Feel free to jump in and say.
I think that because both Malik Yawmiddin and Malik Yawmiddin are used in different dialects.
Perfect. MashaAllah. Jazakallah khair. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. So basically, we're basing it off the Uthmani Mus'haf script, which we talked about last week, where Sayyidina Uthman subhanAllah wrote the Mus'haf and it didn't have any harakat. So what we're doing to accommodate both styles, it's written in that form. It's mashallah preserved in writing and in pronunciation. So we'll just go to the next one, inshallah. Yes, heavy versus light. Now you're probably familiar with this. You probably heard the kha, which is a bit heavy. You'll probably hear ha, it's naturally light. A big shortcut, and I tell people this to make things a bit easier for them in order to differentiate between the heavy and the light letters. By default, a letter that's heavy, in order to make it heavy, as you can see on the diagram on the right-hand side, you need to have some spacing between the tongue and the roof of your mouth in order for the sound to reverberate or to bounce. So it actually, you're creating a cavity in which your voice sounds a lot deeper in terms of tone. So you can't say kha, you have to say ha by dropping the by dropping the front of your tongue and lifting it to the back. As you can see on the left, there is a lighter letter. And the lighter letter, mashallah, naturally doesn't need to have that much space and reverberation. So if I ever correct you, say make this heavy or make this light, then this is a diagram I need to have in the back of your mind. I'll go to the next slide. We'll just quickly brush over it. Brother Isra, inshallah, might share this document with you later on. These are highly recommended readings. The first two are basically teaching programs. I highly recommend Dr. Ayman Swade's work. MashaAllah, if you can memorize that book from cover to cover, you're more than qualified to be a Tajweed Muqri. So it's not actually just as a learner's guide, it's a teacher's guide. The second thing you have is Sister Karima Karol Siponiski. She's written a really good Tajweed guide in English. She was one of the first pioneers in that field, mashallah. She's a really well-known muqri'ah. She learned over in Medina Munawwara. Other things you can rely on are the typical Qaida Nuraniyya. I am sure, mashallah, there's definitely an Arabic version. There's a version for the subcontinent as well. This is really helpful too, just to do a quick revision. And there is another Arabic book called Kitab Mu'allim al-Qira'a al-Saghir al-Kabir. And this is by Rida Hamid. So yeah, just either take notes in your own leisure or go on and just buy the books. Go to the next one. Alrighty, alhamdulillah. Now we're cooking with gas, as they say. So this is the first letter, alif. You probably hear it. It's pronounced as a, u, i. I've shown it on the right in different various forms. It comes at least 20,063 times in the Quran. This is a really important letter. A common mistake I find is people pronounce it between the a and the u. So they'll say, rather than saying a, u, i, they'll say oh, for example, because it's easier for their tongue, or because it's maybe the way they got brought up, or because there's a heavy letter in front of it. For example, rather than saying they'll say oh. And that completely changes the sifa, the inherent characteristic of the Hamza. So just remember, this is the rule that I teach to people that are even competing at an international level, not just qaida for kids. If you ever have a doubt about any letter, break it into 3 forms. So you'll have a, u, i. If you have doubts about what you're saying, for example, let's just say, like we said, rather than saying, are you saying oh? If just go back, break it down, a, u, i, and then go, oh, okay. That way you can measure the deviation of your pronunciation. Bismillah. We'll cover. I'll probably try to do Laam, the next one, and then we'll break away for Surah Al-Fatiha. We'll just go to the next slide. So to pronounce it clearly, this is a cross section of your vocal cords. This is way at the back of your throat. It comes out with air, but you actually, to get the clean a or the you have to close your vocal cords in a sharp motion. So say like this. So that comes out as a clean Hamza, and then the air lets it out. So that's basically what gets you that motion. Don't confuse this with a ha. The two other diagrams on the left with the slightly open vocal cords, that's how you let out the ha, like ha. Because your vocal cords, mashallah, do all the hard work. You're just letting out the air. So just to show you quite similarities, they come from the same place, but the amount of air variation in your vocal cords changes it. Let's go to the next one. That one is la. Yes. So Laam, inshallah, I'll probably stop there before I get feedback. Simply pronounce it as la, lu, li. The biggest common mistake is people sometimes pronounce it as la. Now, the tricky about this letter is that depending on the context, it can be heavy or light, but this only happens in the word Allah. So I'll show you an example to the next one. So here, yes, so I'm just showing you the mechanics of the letter. You put the lam on the tip of your front hard palate on the mouth. That's why I refer to it as a hard palate. It's next to the teeth. And the air goes around your tongue, as you can see. And if you go to the next one, as you're pronouncing the lam, the dotted diagram on the far left actually shows you where your tongue is actually touching on the front part of your mouth. As you're dropping the lam, the sound slightly changes to get that la at the end. So it's called a variable letter, technically speaking, in Arabic. We're not going to cover that in detail, but as you can see, the positioning of the front of your mouth is crucial. Front of your tongue is crucial for this. We'll go to the next one. So here, there's two variations of la. On the right is mufakham, or the heavy la. When you say Allah, you're actively engaging the back of your throat while lifting the tongue. When you say it with a kasra, lillahi, you're actually engaging the left-hand diagram because you're trying to make it as light as possible. So like I said, the trick to making things heavy, the back of the tongue is always raised and you try to create as much of a U-shaped cavity. We'll go to the next one, inshallah. So what do you reckon, brother? So we'll just break off into groups and just test this one out.
Okay, so in this one, we are practicing the Hamza and the Laam. That's right?
Exactly, yes. Because mashallah, they come in pairs, as you can see. So we can probably, what do you reckon we should do just to move forward to make it easy?
I think we have almost